For those of you who haven't visited the southeast for a while, the Penola Ecclesia is about 400 kilometres south of Adelaide. Our membership currently is 13. We meet in the CWA hall in Penola because it's central to our members. Half of us travel about 50 kilometres or more to get to Penola. The Tregenzas, Ian and Judy, John and Michelle and Phoebe, live in Penola, and as a result they get to set up our hall, which includes an open fire in winter. We've had 4 baptisms in the last 5 years at Penola. Jason Dunn, Brad and Phoebe Tregenza and Mark Moffat. We all stay for lunch after the meeting, and because of our small numbers, most of us have been able to meet during the COVID-19 restrictions. And you're all welcome to come and join us on any Sunday morning. I still do a bit of teaching in primary schools, and earlier this year I was in a Year 4-5 class in a small school just outside of Mount Gambier, Morak Primary. And in one lesson I had to dial up the Japanese teacher in Adelaide and had her on the screen delivering a Japanese lesson. The lesson had a cultural aspect of Japan, and it involved how they cope with stress in very crowded cities. It was based on a thing called Shinrin Yoku, forest therapy or medicine. It's simply spending time outdoors, preferably in a quiet space, under a canopy of trees. In Japanese, Shinrin means forest, and Yoku means bath, or immersing oneself in the forest and soaking in the atmosphere through the senses. It's a form of meditation that encourages you to take time out, clear your mind of the hustle and bustle of life, and to be calm. Among other things, the benefits of Shinrin Yoku are supposed to include reducing blood pressure and stress, improved mood, and increased ability to focus. How do the Japanese find time to do this? Ideally, they have, just like what you have around the corner in Adelaide, in the South Parklands, the Himeji Gardens, a quiet, still place with a well set out garden with paths and nooks where people go to contemplate, to meditate, just unwind from the constant stimulation and sensory bombardment that happens in our busy lives. The idea of taking time out to clear your mind of the busy things of life got me thinking about the hustle and bustle of the lives that we live. As an educator, I'm told I need to change channels more often when teaching as an aid to learning. That means to keep providing different stimulation for students so they don't get bored and turn off. And we see this not only in children. As adults, we too are caught up in the changing channels lifestyle. Alvin Toffler, the author of Future Shock, talked about the information age, where we are surrounded by noise, by facts, opinions, movement, breaking news, music, celebrity gossip and advertisements. You see it on the television, hear it on the radio, read it in the paper. It's right there on your phone, on your tablet, on your car radio, and now even on your watch. And we can't seem to get enough of it. Even more invasive is the social media, the internet, Facebook, emails, texts, podcasts, Twitter, Google searches, YouTube, Instagram, and many other thieves of our time. And it's not all that inspiring or educational. Apart from the trivia that is filling our days, there is news on things like COVID-19 data and restrictions, protests against racism, environmental issues, unemployment statistics, foreign ownership issues, trade wars. The world seems to be running to and fro with information, and a lot of it is insignificant or just distressing, adding to the hustle and bustle without instruction or enlightenment. And then we read in Daniel, "But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the end of the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased." Again in the Psalms, "They reel to and fro and stagger like a drunken man and are at their wits' end." And so we've read this morning about what the Bible has to say about taking time out and how to clear our minds of the hustle and bustle of life to be calm. First 3 verses of Psalm 46. God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth give way and the mountains fall into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam and the mountains quake with their surging. But it's the message of verse 10 I'd like to focus on this morning. Be still and know that I am God. Other translations read, "Cease striving and know that I am God." And again, "Calm down and learn that I am God." The big message from Psalm 46 is that we are protected and strengthened by God, no matter how overwhelming things might seem to get, or what things are going on around us: disease, conflicts, disasters, or no matter what our health, family, financial, work-related problems are. As verse 1 says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. We just need to be still and know that I am God. Stop striving. Just stop what you're doing. Let go, and then know that I am God. Hopefully with the coronavirus restrictions, we've all had at least some time to slow down, to have a break from or change to our hectic schedules. And just maybe we've realised that we can get caught up in the toing and froing of this world, that busy work perhaps isn't as important as we thought it was. Be still. Just stop what you're doing and then know that I am God. Acknowledge Him as the creator of everything, as our refuge, that He is with us, and be in awe. Trust in His plan for us. Problem solved. Nothing else matters, really. We're told to stop what we are doing and put our faith in the fact that God alone is the ruler of the universe. Acknowledge Him and learn about Him. Verse 10 goes on to tell us He will be exalted among the nations and all the earth. There will be no question of who God is and what He is doing. If we know God, then we take comfort in reading and learning about Him. We all know Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures." Now notice this, "He leads me beside still waters." God leads us to still places. That's one of the things he does as our shepherd. Not only does he provide for us, not only does he make us lie down, that is, be at peace and have rest, but he also leads us to places that are still, that is, still waters. He wants us to be in places that are calm. What do we do when we find this still place? We only need to turn back a few pages to Job and look at that example. Job has been joined by his 3 friends. After all the calamity that has happened to him, he still maintains that he was righteous before God. But his friends are convinced that Job has sinned and that there was something that Job had not recognised as being sin in him. And they kept trying to convince him that he needed to do something about it. After listening to Job, justifying all that he'd done, they stopped arguing with him. Why? Because he was righteous in his own eyes. And then this young man called Elihu comes on the scene. He apologises to them and he says, I know I'm a young man, but maybe you could hear some wisdom from me. And he began to answer Job by outlining the great things that God does. And then he tried to get Job not to look at his own works and all the things that he'd done to justify himself, but to look at God and try to turn things around so that he saw himself from God's perspective. And he says in Job chapter 37, listen to this, O Job. Stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. That's it in a nutshell. What's his answer? Job, be still and consider what God has done. Then he continues to tell him what God had done in the heavens and what he'd done with men. He tells him to calm down, be still, Job. Ponder God's wondrous works in nature, in man, his purpose, his plan. Look at what he's doing. In other words, we could say, Job, compare yourself and your little pitiful works that you take such pride in to God and his utterly magnificent works that he does every day. Once we see ourselves in comparison to our great God and Father and the wonders he does, and his Son Jesus Christ, and the sacrifice that he made, then we find ourselves in a more receptive mind to understand and receive instruction, correction, direction, strength, or whatever it is that God wants us to have. We can turn back a little further for another example. Turn with me to Exodus 14. The Israelites are out in the desert. They fled slavery in Egypt, but now they see Pharaoh and his 600 best chariots and troops descending on them. In verse 11 we read, the people said to Moses, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? Let us serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Moses answered the people, do not be afraid. Stand firm or still, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring to you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. We sometimes think we've got it tough. Here the Israelites were in terror that they would be slaughtered by this professional army of Pharaoh. They were trapped between the army and the waters of the Red Sea. They had no defences. They had no army. They wouldn't have had any weapons. And they thought their situation was pretty hopeless. Moses says, "Calm down. Be still. Don't be afraid." Why? So that they could see the salvation of God. The salvation that God was bringing to them. If they were all riled up, they'd miss it. Notice he says, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today." Then he repeats it at the end of verse 14. You need only to be still. So you can see, so you can observe and understand, so you can witness the things God is doing for you. And as a result, the Israelites witnessed God's power as he saved them and destroyed the armies of Egypt. And as verse 31 says, "And when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant." If we are busy, all stressed, all upset, moving at 100 miles a minute, we miss a lot. If we are fearful, our minds are focused on our fear. We're not watching for the deliverance that God may very well be working out for us. Sometimes in our trials, we get so wrapped up in the trial and all the bad things that are happening that we don't see God's ever-present help. Be still and know that I am God. Now I want to take you to the man who had that perfect relationship with God and who mastered the practice of being still. Of course, I speak of Jesus. There are a number of places in his life where it is recorded that he was still, where he went off to be alone with God, where he went up to a high mountain to pray to God. He went off on his own in the Garden of Gethsemane for guidance from God, or where he rested after a big day in the back of a boat on the Sea of Galilee. Let's look at that one in Mark chapter 4. Mark chapter 4 from verse 35. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked one another, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." Quiet, be still. The story follows a number of parables in the chapter. There's the parable of the sower, with the seed that fell in different areas. The parable of the lamp on the stand that should shine brightly. Another parable of growing seed showing the bounty of God and his creation. And the parable of the small mustard seed that grows to be the largest of all the garden plants. These parables represent how we use and develop our faith and the amazing power of God to make things grow. As is often the case, Jesus had to explain these parables to his disciples. Verse 34 says, "But when he was alone with his disciples, he explained everything." They then headed out onto the Sea of Galilee, leaving the crowd behind. The story is also told in Matthew and Luke, and it portrays an extremely busy day where Jesus was healing people, casting out demons, and speaking. While the scripture doesn't say it, the picture is painted that Jesus was exhausted. He requested a boat to escape the crowds that were coming to him. On the journey, the huge storm rolls in. The disciples were afraid for their lives. They looked for Jesus to help them, found him fast asleep from exhaustion in the back of the boat. They were terrified because of the storm and woke him up. According to Mark's account, Jesus was not happy. He rebuked the wind. He spoke sternly to it and said, "Quiet, be still." The storm and the huge waves stopped immediately, and everything went completely calm. In verse 40, we see that Jesus not only rebuked the storm, but he then turned to his disciples. "I've just finished explaining to you the parables about growing your faith and the wonders of God's creation." And he says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Even before the miracle, the disciples knew who he was. After all, they did ask him to save them. Maybe in the pressure of their situation, in the toing and froing of the boat, they could have just been still and acknowledged God. How often do we ask God for everything, but don't stop to listen or to be still? The act of being still and calm becomes more of a challenge in our hectic world. The world asks us to be busy. God asks us to be still so that we can receive love, peace, instruction, wonder, guidance. Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? Jesus doesn't really want an answer. He knows that we often don't live by our faith. He just wants us to think about what we are placing our faith and trust in. And maybe in our next troubling circumstance, if we can be still and acknowledge God, we'll let go a little bit more and maybe live more by faith and less by fear. We too need to just find the time and find the place to be still and acknowledge God in our lives. Whether God calms our storm, takes us out of it, or sits with us in it, he is always there for us. He always cares and will never forsake us. He controls everything, but he doesn't always stop everything. If he did, we wouldn't need to have faith or to trust in him. He is with us in all situations, giving us the strength to make it through and beyond our circumstances. Corinthians, we read, "God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, he will always provide a way out so that you can endure it." So, why do I worry so much about my problems when God can destroy the armies of Egypt, and his Son can stop the waves in the ocean with a single rebuke? We just need to be still. Take the time, find a place by still waters, whether it be in that early morning quiet walk, or a quiet room at work or at home, a bench in the parklands at lunchtime, or stepping outside at night, looking at the wonders of the night sky, or as we now contemplate the bread and wine. Let us acknowledge that God is the Almighty, the Creator of all things, our strength and our refuge, an ever-present help in trouble. And in this still quiet place, let us remember the words of Moses to the Israelites. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Remember what Elihu said to Job. Listen to this, Job. Stop and consider God's wonders. Remember the psalm. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. And remember Jesus. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world.